Disclaimer: it's inspired by reality, shaped by imagination.
Feeling confused about modern relationships? You're not alone. Shelton and Behar are tackling the biggest questions surrounding today's marriages, from shifting roles to financial pressures. But what started as a thoughtful debate on The View quickly spiraled into something no one expected. On one side, Blake Shelton insists that marriage today can be just as strong, if not stronger, than it was 50 years ago. On the other, Joy Behar fires back that divorce rates, changing values, and cultural shifts prove the opposite. At first, the back and forth feels playful until Joy cuts deep with a jab that leaves Blake visibly rattled. The studio audience gasps. Whoopi tries to mediate, but the clash only intensifies, leading to one of the most dramatic moments daytime TV has ever seen. Blake Shelton slamming the table, refusing to back down, and walking right off the set. So, has happily ever after been redefined, or is marriage stronger than ever? Let's dive into the fiery debate that had everyone talking. The cameras came up on a bright Wednesday morning at The View, the familiar theme music fading as the co-hosts settled into their seats. Whoopi Goldberg, ever the calm anchor, grinned toward the audience. "All right, folks, we've got a treat today. You know him from his chart-topping country hits, his larger-than-life personality, and of course, the voice. Please welcome Blake Shelton." The audience erupted. Applause filled the studio as Blake Shelton strode out, cowboy boots clicking against the floor, his tall frame towering over the panel. He waved, his easy grin lighting up the room, before hugging Whoopi and giving a quick nod to Sunny Hostin, Anna Navarro, and Joy Behar. "Blake Shelton, everybody," Whoopi beamed. "Thanks for joining us." "Thanks for having me," Blake replied, his Oklahoma drawl relaxed, playful. "I've been watching y'all for years, mostly when Gwen makes me." The crowd laughed warmly, and even Joy cracked a smile at the mention of Gwen Stefani. Whoopi leaned in. "We thought we'd dive into something we know you've got thoughts on. The question is marriage stronger or weaker today than it was 50 years ago?" The applause simmered down as Blake settled into his chair. He rubbed his hands together like he was about to play a hand of poker. "Well, I'll tell you, marriage is different today. But weaker? Nah, I don't think so. I think love's always been complicated, but people are still out here fighting for it. That's what matters." The audience clapped. It was an optimistic take, and Blake's sincerity rang clear. Sunny nodded. "That's an important point. We have different challenges today, financial stress, shifting gender roles, but commitment can still be strong." But Joy Behar wasted no time. Leaning forward, her eyes sharp behind her glasses, she asked Blake, "Blake, are you really saying marriage is stronger today? Because last I checked, divorce rates are through the roof, half of Hollywood can't keep it together, and frankly, people don't even view marriage the same way they used to. 50 years ago, it meant stability. Today, it's more like a fashion statement." The audience let out a mix of laughs and gasps. Blake chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, Joy, I'll take that as your way of saying welcome to the show. But listen, divorce ain't new. People split back then, too. They just didn't always talk about it. My folks' generation had their share of broken homes. They just kept it quieter. Doesn't mean it didn't happen." Joy raised her eyebrow, unimpressed. "So you're saying we should just accept that it's all the same? Come on. Families were tighter. People didn't jump in and out of marriages like revolving doors." Anna jumped in, trying to smooth the edges. "I think what Blake is saying is that love evolves. Our parents and grandparents faced different pressures, but that doesn't mean they were happier or more fulfilled." Blake pointed at Anna, grinning. "Exactly. Thank you. Someone gets it." The audience applauded again, clearly leaning toward Blake's perspective. But Joy wasn't done. "Blake, you're a celebrity. You live in a bubble. Out in the real world, people are struggling. They can't afford to get married, or they do, and it falls apart because life is harder now. Don't romanticize it." Blake's smile faltered just slightly. "With all due respect, Joy, I don't live in a bubble. I grew up in Ada, Oklahoma. My parents worked hard, Marriage wasn't easy for them either. I don't sit here saying it's perfect. I'm just saying marriage is still worth fighting for." That line earned Blake loud cheers. He leaned back in his chair, clearly feeling the crowd's energy behind him. Joy, however, crossed her arms, her smirk returning. "All right, cowboy, but when you say worth fighting for, are you talking about everyone, or just folks like you who've got the money to weather the storms?" The tension tightened. The laughter was gone now. The audience sat quieter, sensing the sparks were about to ignite into flames. Sonny interjected. "Joy, I think what Blake is saying is universal. Love takes effort. It doesn't matter if you're in Hollywood or Queens. It's about what you put in." Blake nodded, grateful. "Exactly. Marriage is a choice every single day. Stronger, weaker, that's up to the people in it." Whoopi raised her hands. All right, we're just getting started, folks. Clearly there's no shortage of passion at this table. We'll dig deeper into this right after the break." The audience clapped as the music swelled, but the looks exchanged across the table told a different story. Blake adjusted in his chair, jaw set, ready for round two. Joy scribbled something on her notepad, eyes glinting with the promise of sharper words ahead. What began as a warm welcome had already turned into a crackling debate, with tension thick enough to cut. The sparks were no longer subtle. They were catching fire.
The cameras faded back in after the commercial break, the audience clapping along to the upbeat transition music. But the air in the studio wasn't nearly as light as it had been earlier. The tension from before hung in the space like static, waiting for someone to spark it again. Whoopi, always trying to set the table evenly, leaned forward. All right, welcome back. We're here with Blake Shelton, and we're talking about marriage, whether it's stronger or weaker today than it was 50 years ago. We've heard some very different perspectives already, and I have a feeling we're just getting warmed up. Blake smirked, adjusting his mic. "Oh, we're warmed up, all right." The audience laughed, but Joy pounced. "Blake, let me ask you something. Do you really think the average couple today has it better than the couples who married in the 60s or 70s? Because from where I sit, those marriages lasted longer. They didn't crumble every time someone got bored or found a new app to swipe on." Gasps and chuckles rippled through the audience. Blake shifted forward in his chair, his easy charm now tinged with irritation. "Joy, I'm not saying marriage is easy. I've been through my own tough times. But sitting here saying marriages today are weaker, like folks don't take it seriously, that's just not fair. People still want love. They still fight for it." Joy shot back, eyebrows arched. "Fight for it? Tell that to the divorce courts. Half the people in Hollywood treat marriage like a red carpet accessory." The audience groaned at the jab. Blake leaned back, his smile gone. "Now hold on, don't lump everyone together. Just because some people don't get it right doesn't mean marriage is broken. You ever think maybe people are just more honest now? Maybe folks 50 years ago stayed in miserable marriages because they felt they had no choice." The crowd broke into applause, some nodding fiercely. Sunny Hostin jumped in, her tone calm but firm. "That's an important point, Joy. Back then, many women especially didn't have financial independence. They stayed because they had to, not because the marriage was healthy. Today, people have options, and that doesn't automatically mean marriage is weaker. It might mean people are refusing to settle." Ana Navarro added, "Exactly. My parents' generation stuck it out, but I wouldn't call all those marriages strong. Some of them were just trapped. What we should be asking is, how do we redefine strength in marriage today?" The audience clapped again, warming to the idea. But Joy, however, wasn't swayed. Redefine, everything's being redefined these days. Marriage used to mean stability. Now it's about finding yourself. That's why families are falling apart. That's why kids don't know what a solid household looks like. Blake leaned forward, his voice carrying more weight now. "With respect, Joy, that's a pretty bleak way to look at it. I know plenty of kids growing up in loving homes today, even if their parents don't fit some 1950s mold. Love's not weaker, it's just different." A section of the audience applauded, but others clapped at Joy's firmness. The divide was clear. Whoopi, sensing the split, tried to temper the storm. "Okay, so what I'm hearing is, we've got folks saying the commitment is still there, just looks different, and others saying the numbers don't lie. But let's remember, marriage ain't just numbers, it's people." Joy ignored Whoopi's attempt to steer. She turned back to Blake, her tone sharper. "Tell me this, Blake. You really think marriages today are stronger when people like you, celebrities, are on your second, third marriages before 50? That's the example?" The audience gasped audibly, some groaning at the direct hit. Blake's jaw tightened, his hand pressing flat against the table. "Now wait just a damn minute," he said, his country drawl carrying a hard edge. "You don't know what I've been through. I've made mistakes, sure, but I've also learned. I worked on myself, on my relationship, and I'm proud of where I am today. That's not weakness, that's growth." A burst of applause shot up, with some in the audience even standing to clap. Joy smirked, unfazed. "Growth is fine, Blake, but if marriages were as strong as you say, you wouldn't need so many do-overs." The crowd reacted again, half laughing, half groaning. Tension was boiling. Anna interjected quickly. "Come on, Joy, that's not fair. People grow, people change. The fact that Blake is still choosing marriage, even after hardship, that says something about his belief in it." Sonny nodded. "I agree. Commitment after failure shows resilience. We can't dismiss that." Blake gave both co-hosts a grateful look, then turned back to Joy. "See, that's what I'm talking about. Marriage ain't about being perfect. It's about getting back up when you fall. 50 years ago or today, that part hasn't changed." The audience clapped again, louder this time. Joy, however, doubled down. "Well, maybe I'm old-fashioned, but to me, a strong marriage is one that lasts, period. Not one that falls apart and gets rebuilt like a bad construction project." The audience erupted, some cheering her bluntness, others booing. The tension was electric. Whoopi raised her hands, her voice cutting through. "All right, y'all, I think we can all agree there's plenty to say here, but don't go anywhere. We're just getting to the heart of this debate." The music swelled as the segment ended, but the looks across the table told the real story. Blake's jaw clenched, Joy's smirk unrelenting. The audience caught in a whirlwind of applause and outrage. The sparks had turned into open flame, and the fire was far from burning out.
The studio felt heavier now. What had started as a playful spar between Blake Shelton and Joy Behar had taken on sharper edges. The laughter was still there, but it was laced with unease, and the tension rippled through the live audience. Blake leaned forward, his hands clasped loosely, his voice shifting from joking bravado to something more rooted. "Look, Joy, I've been married twice. I've seen it fail, I've seen it succeed. When Gwen and I finally made it work, it wasn't about the old rules or the new rules. It was about surviving all the noise around us. And honestly, that noise is louder now than it was 50 years ago." The room quieted. Even Joy tilted her head, listening more closely. Blake continued. "Back in my parents' time, people had struggles too. Money problems, temptation, all of it. But today you've got 1,000 voices on your phone telling you to quit, cheat, start over, or that you deserve better. And guess what? That mess creeps into your home. It's poison." Joy folded her arms, unimpressed. "Or maybe, Blake, it's not poison. Maybe it's empowerment. Women stayed in bad marriages 50 years ago because they were trapped. Financially, socially, sometimes even legally. Now people have choices. You call that poison, I call that progress." That hit hard. The audience snapped into applause, but Blake shook his head. "Progress isn't throwing something away because it's hard. My parents fought like cats and dogs, but they stuck it out. I learned something from that. They weren't perfect, but their commitment meant something. You don't just replace people like you replace a car." Sunny Hostin jumped in, her voice carrying a different energy. "But Blake, don't you think people deserve happiness? Why should someone stay in misery just for tradition's sake? That's not love, that's endurance." Blake's face tightened. "Sonny, there's a difference between misery and work. People confuse the two. Every marriage has seasons, good ones, bad ones. If you bail at the first storm, you'll never see the rainbow. That's the problem today. Nobody wants to ride out the storm." Joy leaned across the table, raising her voice now. "And what about women who rode out storms with fists, Blake? What about people who rode out storms with abuse and silence? Staying wasn't noble, it was survival. You can't romanticize that era. You're looking at it through a guitar-strumming cowboy hat fantasy." The audience gasped. Whoopi put her hand up, her voice calm but firm. Okay, let's breathe for a second. Both of you are talking about real pain and real values. Blake's saying marriage takes grit.
Joy's saying sometimes grit turns into chains. These aren't small differences. They're two different ways of defining love itself. Blake's jaw tightened as he looked at Joy. For the first time, the joking was gone from his eyes. He said quietly, almost under his breath, "If commitment is a fantasy, then maybe love doesn't mean anything anymore." That landed like a punch. The audience was divided, half clapping, half murmuring. Some leaned in closer, some shook their heads. The energy in the studio wasn't lighthearted anymore. It was raw. Joy straightened her back, unmoved. Commitment isn't a fantasy, Blake, but blind loyalty is. And too many people, especially women, paid the price for it. The emotional weight pressed down on everyone. For a moment, no one spoke. Blake's eyes darted to the audience, then back at Joy. He wasn't ready to walk away yet, but his silence carried the promise of an explosion still to come. The clash had turned personal, and everyone watching knew the line between debate and open conflict had blurred. The real breaking point was now just a breath away.
The View stage had become a battlefield. What had started as a conversation about the strength of marriage across generations had spiraled into something far heavier, and now the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Blake Shelton leaned back in his chair, but the calm posture couldn't mask the fire in his eyes. He had taken enough jabs from Joy Behar, and the audience could sense he was close to his limit. "Joy," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "you keep painting me as if I'm defending abuse, as if I want women chained to unhappy lives. That's not what I said. That's not what I believe. What I'm saying is that people quit too easy now. Marriage isn't disposable, and if we treat it that way, we're going to end up alone." Joy didn't flinch. She leaned forward, her hand chopping the air for emphasis. "And what I'm saying, Blake, is that people were alone back then. Alone in their pain, their silence, their lack of choices. You think divorce is poison? For a lot of women, divorce was oxygen. It was survival." The audience erupted. Applause mixed with gasps. Blake raised his voice for the first time all show. "And what about the kids, Joy? What about the families left torn in half? I've seen it. My parents split when I was young, and I can tell you it leaves scars. You don't just bounce back from that. Everyone cheers for freedom, but no one talks about the wreckage left behind." For a moment, Joy seemed to hesitate, but then she shot back, sharper than ever. "Sometimes those scars heal stronger than the wound itself, Blake. Sometimes the wreckage is better than living in a burning house." The words hung heavy in the air. Sunny Hostin jumped in, her tone earnest. "Both of you are right in some ways. Divorce can save lives, but so can commitment. The question isn't about the past, it's about what kind of marriages we want now." But Blake wasn't done. He turned toward Joy, pointing lightly toward her as his voice cracked with emotion. "You sit here, Joy, talking about choices, about empowerment, but what about loyalty? What about standing by someone through hell and back? Gwen and I, we've had storms too. If I treated marriage like a throwaway, I wouldn't have her. I'd be another guy drinking alone in a bar. Marriage means fighting for it." The audience clapped, but the split was obvious. Half the room cheered for him, the other half roared for Joy. Joy leaned back, crossing her arms. "You know what, Blake? You're a good singer, but maybe you're not the best philosopher. Times have changed, and people don't need saving. They need options." That landed hard. Blake slammed his hand lightly against the table, startling everyone. He stood up, towering over the table, his voice sharp. "If believing in loyalty makes me old-fashioned, then fine, call me a dinosaur. But I won't sit here and let you mock the one thing I still believe in." Gasps filled the studio. Whoopi Goldberg, who had been watching quietly, finally raised her voice. All right, everybody breathe. This is The View, not WrestleMania." The audience laughed nervously, but the tension didn't break. Joy smirked. "Blake, you're a good singer, but maybe you're not the best philosopher. Times have changed, and people don't need saving. They need options. That was it. Blake's jaw tightened. His chair scraped loudly against the floor as he pushed back. The sound echoed like a warning bell. He stood, towering over the table, his voice sharp. If believing in loyalty makes me old-fashioned, then fine, call me a dinosaur. But I won't sit here and let you mock the one thing I still believe in. Gasps filled the studio. Whoopi Goldberg stood halfway, her hand out. Blake, sit down! Don't do this! But Blake shook his head, looking out at the audience. I came here to talk about marriage, not to be turned into a punchline. If commitment's a joke now, then maybe I don't belong at this table. The crowd erupted, half booing, half cheering, phones raised high to capture the viral moment. Joy raised her eyebrow, cool as ever. Walking away from a debate, Blake? Guess that commitment talk only goes so far. That stung. Blake turned, visibly wrestling with whether to answer, but instead he shook his head slowly. You don't get it, Joy. You never will. And with that, he walked off the stage. The audience roared, half in shock, half in exhilaration. The cameras caught Joy's smirk, Whoopi's sigh, and Sonny's wide-eyed stare. It was chaos, and it was unforgettable. The clash had reached its breaking point, and in true Blake Shelton style, he exited with the same raw honesty that had fueled every word.
The View's set was buzzing, even after Blake Shelton's dramatic walk-off. Audience members were still on their feet, some clapping in support of Blake, others shaking their heads, clearly siding with Joy Behar. The energy hadn't settled. It lingered, electric, as the remaining co-hosts tried to steady the conversation. Whoopi let out a long sigh and leaned into her microphone. Well, folks, that was something. You don't see that every day. Her tone carried both humor and fatigue, an attempt to bring the moment back down to earth. Sonny Hostin looked visibly shaken. I wish Blake had stayed, she admitted softly. I think he wanted to be heard, but I also think he felt dismissed, and whether you agree with him or not, those feelings are real. Joy adjusted in her seat, lifting her chin, still steady, but clearly processing what had just happened. Look, I don't hate the guy. I think Blake is passionate, and I think he loves deeply. But passion isn't always enough to keep a marriage together. Sometimes people need more than love. They need safety, independence, a life that feels like their own. Ana Navarro jumped in, her voice calm but pointed. Both of you, Blake and Joy, were speaking the truths that exist in different lives. For some, marriage is a lifeline. For others, it's a cage. We can't pretend one story fits everyone. The studio audience gave a round of applause. Joy smiled faintly, though her tone carried conviction. That's what I was trying to say. Marriage 50 years ago might have looked strong from the outside, but how many women had the freedom to actually walk away? We can't call that strength. It was silence, and silence isn't strength. The camera panned to the audience, catching faces deep in thought. Some nodded at Joy's words, others exchanged whispers, still unsettled by Blake's exit. Whoopi leaned forward, folding her hands. Let's be real, folks. Marriage has always been complicated. It's not just about comparing then versus now. It's about figuring out what we want it to be moving forward. Do we want marriages that last because people feel stuck, or marriages that last because people are truly committed? Her words landed heavy. Joy nodded, adding quietly, and sometimes the bravest form of commitment is to yourself. The audience gave another round of applause, softer this time, more reflective than explosive. Sonny, still thoughtful, said, I actually think Blake was touching on something too. Commitment, real commitment, is rare these days, and maybe that's something we should talk about more. How to create marriages people actually want to fight for rather than feel forced to stay in. The crowd murmured in agreement. It was a rare moment of balance on The View. Ana Navarro leaned back with a half smile. Well, I'll say this, if nothing else, today proved one thing. Marriage is still one of the most passionate, divisive topics out there. And leave it to Blake Shelton to remind us that love, loyalty, and country songs are still alive and well. The audience laughed, easing the tension at last. Whoopi gave a knowing look at the camera. Blake Shelton may have walked off, but he made sure we're all still talking about marriage. And maybe that's the point. Whether you think it's stronger or weaker than 50 years ago, what really matters is how you make it work today. Marriage isn't one size fits all. It's messy, it's hard, and yeah, sometimes it's worth fighting for. Other times it's worth walking away. She gave a small shrug and the crowd clapped again, the mood now calmer, almost cathartic. The camera caught Joy one last time. She wasn't smiling, but her expression was steady, resolved. If you want marriage to work today, it's got to be built on choice, not chains. Love that grows, not love that traps. That's where I stand. The outro music swelled, signaling the end of the segment. The audience erupted in applause, knowing they had just witnessed a viral moment destined to be replayed across news outlets, talk radio, and social media feeds for days to come. Blake Shelton's empty chair was still visible, a silent reminder of his stormy exit. And though he wasn't there to finish the conversation, his words echoed just as loudly as Joy's, leaving viewers across the country divided, emotional, and deeply engaged in the timeless question, is marriage today weaker or just evolving into something new? As the credits rolled on the heated segment, one thing was certain. The View had once again lived up to its name, offering perspectives that clashed, collided, and lingered long after the camera stopped.